Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is episode 9 of Azure Zero to Hero series, and in this video we will explore Azure storage services. This is going to be a really cool video because Azure storage services is a very easy concept to understand, and in today's video especially we will cover what is a storage account in Azure. We will understand what are the different types of storage services in Azure. We will compare them with AWS. If you're not familiar with AWS, that's okay. And finally, I'll also explain you the real life use cases when you should use a particular storage service and when not to use a particular storage service. Now, before we get started, let me quickly tell you that this is a GitHub repository because a lot of people ask me notes. So if you go to this repository, this will have the course syllabus as well as day-wise folders. For example, today is day 9. So if you click on day 9, you will find the notes. This is not the complete notes. It's just a revision material. So once you watch the video, you can use these notes available as a revision to the concepts that I have explained. So please give this repository a star so that you get the continuous updates of the changes that I make to the repository. Let's start with understanding what are the advantages of using Microsoft Azure storage services, or why should I store my data on Microsoft Azure? It's a very valid question, because I can also buy my own storage and store the data on my on-premises. Just like I can set up my own data center, I can place a lot of servers and use my own servers. But the reason why many people use virtual machines on the public cloud providers is because of the maintenance cost, everything that is included with the data center. So one is the same thing. If you are using your own storage, you have to maintain it. You also have to take care of a lot of things like security, overhead, all of these things. But additionally, the other benefits that you get by storing your data on Microsoft Azure is number one, the most important one is the durability. So Microsoft Azure offers a durability of 99.9999 up to 11 nines. That is, the chances of getting your data lost is 0.00000001. Like up to 11, this goes up to 11. That is, your data is very safe. There are very, very, very less chances of your data getting lost. So this is taken care by Microsoft Azure. How? It creates multiple copies of your data and it has its own algorithm. But the amount of durability that you get is super good. Number two is there are some high performance services that Microsoft Azure offers. So you can use the high performance services to make sure that your data is quickly readable and writable. Then security, which is most important. You can integrate the Microsoft Azure storage services or the resources that you have created with Microsoft AD, right? The IAM basically, and you can make sure that the resources that you have created are highly secure. So Microsoft AD can be integrated. And then there are additional benefits like you can easily manage the life cycle. We will get into all of these benefits, but these are the primary reasons why you should go with the storage services on public cloud. Of course, if you have any specific requirements that your data cannot be stored on the cloud providers and all, then you will still go with the on-premises solution. But these are the advantages that Microsoft Azure offers you. Now, how does Microsoft Azure offer these things? What are the different storage services? Let me just give you an overview. Then we will move towards the Microsoft Azure board and see how to create and use these services. So on a high level, there are 4 services. Number one is Blob Storage. So this is Blob Storage service. Number 2 is File Storage service. Number 3 is Tables. And number 4 is Queues. So these are the 4 different types of services that Microsoft Azure offers. So if you go to the Microsoft Azure board, if you go to the Microsoft Azure console to use any of these services. So this is where I really like Microsoft Azure, how it manages and organizes the storage resources. There is something called as storage account. There are so many benefits of the storage account, but one of the primary things is if you want to use any of these services, or if you want to, let's say, create a blob storage resource. So the first thing that you have to do is create a storage account. And this storage account will be specific for your project or however you would group. And once you go to this storage account, you will go to the blob storage service and create a blob storage resource. Similarly, you can create hundreds of resources, and all of these things can be managed through the storage account. That is, if you want to grant access to the storage resources to a particular person, or you want to manage anything with respect to all of these storage resources, then everything can be managed using this central place called storage account. So now we will move towards the Microsoft Azure board, and we will try to see how to create a storage account and how to use this storage services. After that, I'll also explain what is the difference between each of this storage service. So just search for storage accounts, and creating storage account is pretty straightforward. Just click on the create button and just provide some mandatory details. You will start with subscription and resource group, which are common across all the Azure resources that you create. So provide the subscription and resource group. Then comes the storage account name, which has to be unique. So what I'll try to do is follow a particular nomenclature. It's a standard usually followed. Let's say if I'm working in an organization called Puma, and if I'm working for a team called web development, or if I have to create this storage account for the web development team. So I'll just call it as Puma Web Dev. So it is available. And region, let's keep it as Central India because it's nearby, or you can pick up any region that's closer to you. Performance and redundancy. We'll learn more about these fields as we keep using them. So for now, just click on review plus create. And I did not touch any of these fields, the networking part, data protection, encryption. Now these things we will learn with practice. Click on the create button. And one suggestion that I would give is whenever you create some resources through the UI, and first of all, learn creation of the resources through the UI only. Once you become expert, you can move towards Terraform, you can move towards Azure Resource Manager, CLI, but first start using the user interface. And when this is getting created, carefully look at this particular field, the resource or the resources that are getting created. For everything, let's say you are creating virtual network. Whenever you see this called deployment in progress, now Azure provides a clear information on the hierarchy, how the resources are getting created, like probably the network interfaces, then the subnet. So if you understand that particular hierarchy, it becomes very easy when you move towards Terraform, Resource Manager, CLI, everything. Okay, now our deployment is complete. So click on go to resource. This is the centralized location or the storage account that I was talking about. And from here, you can manage all your Azure resources. But first of all, how to create a resource? These are the services. Like we learned about 4 Azure services, right? The blob, file storage, queue storage, table storage. So these are the 4 services. Now, when should I click on this button and create a blob storage? So here, when you see the container, basically you are creating a blob storage. So when should I click on this button and create a blob storage? When should I click on the file share button and create file storage, blob storage? So this is used when you want to store large amount of unstructured data. That is, you can use any kind of data that can be stored into the blob storage. For example, you can use some large files. You can store images, videos, any kind of unstructured data, you can simply put into the blob storage. You can also store something like your source code, can be your HTML files, your Python code, any kind of data you can store into the blob storage. It is very cheap, and there are many other advantages of the blob storage, but fundamentally when we are trying to understand the difference, let's start with this particular point. Then file storage. Okay, forgot, you can compare blob storage with S3 on AWS. Then comes the file storage. So file storage is used when you want to share the file system with multiple virtual machines or even Kubernetes pods. I'll give you the best example as a DevOps engineer. Let's say you have multiple pods in your AKS cluster that is on your Azure, and you want multiple pods to access some common data. It can be some persistent volume or something. So in such cases, better go with the file storage. Or probably you have some your organizational files, and this file should be accessed by multiple virtual machines. So even in these cases, you can use the file storage. This can be compared with EFS on AWS. But this will be a very common use case as a DevOps engineer when you have multiple pods. So, there are two kind of architectures. One pod can use one volume, or multiple pods can use a common volume. If there is some data that should be accessed by multiple pods. So in such cases, you will go with the file storage. And in this case, there is something called managed disk. We will come to that later, but if you want to go with this particular option, we will use managed disk. Just like AWS, we use EFS here and EBS here. Okay. Now the next option, tables. Tables is basically for no SQL kind of database where you have semi-structured data. Let's say you want to store information. You are working in an e-commerce organization, let's say, and you want to store some information about the users or some data about the users, their frequent purchases, any kind of things that is information that can be stored in NoSQL databases kind of model can be used and stored in the tables. So we will go to the storage accounts. We will use these services, don't worry. And then finally you have queue storage. So queue storage is basically for when, let's say you have an application and your application gets a lot of requests. So basically to process all of these requests, you have to store the requests in a queue and you have to process the requests, right? If 100 users are trying to access your application at once, obviously 100 cannot be, or let's say there are some 1,000 requests or more than 1,000 requests that are coming to your application. You cannot process all 1,000 requests at once. Probably you maintain a queue of users who are trying to access the application. So that kind of queue storage is basically the queue storage service on AKS. This can be directly compared with SQS on the AWS. So this is S3, this is EFS, this is SQS on AWS. If you don't know AWS, don't worry about it. You can totally ignore and just understand the use case. Like this is for the queues. This is for storing any kind of semi-structured data where you want to store something like a key value pair, any kind of key value pair that you want to store. This is for the file storage where you want to share some information between multiple virtual machines or pods. This is the blob storage where you can store any kind of data, right? So you might ask me, Abhishek, why you did not compare this one with any AWS services? Basically, there is no direct match to tables. DynamoDB is there, but it's not an exact thing because DynamoDB also has some additional characteristics. So it cannot be an exact comparison with tables. So you can say that there is no direct storage service comparison between tables and any AWS service. Now let's go and try to play with these things. So containers, basically the blob storage. Click on create container. Let's create one resource and let's see how can we use this particular storage service. So I will create a resource. Let me call it as, let's say, test blob storage. Click on the create button. And now I said, so this got created. Click on test blob storage. I said you can store any kind of information, right? So I'll upload, click on the upload button, and let's try to upload any file from my laptop. So in my laptop, I have, let's go to the downloads folder and I have something called index.html. Let me try to upload this one and see. Okay, there is this index.html file and I've uploaded it. Similarly, you can upload images, you can upload any kind of data into the storage service or storage resource that you have created using blob storage. Similarly, click on file shares and click on plus file share. Let's try to create a file share resource. Provide the name as test file share. Let's keep the defaults. Move to the backup. Backup is very important because the resource that you create through it, like I told you, file share is used for file sharing purpose, where you might have multiple virtual machines trying to access this file system. So it is important to have a backup. So you can create a backup policy. How does your backup policy look like? Should you take backup every day? Should you take backup every week? Something like that. And then click on the review button. Click on create. One thing I'm not sure if you have noticed is about the protocol that is used by this file share resources. So there are multiple protocols such as SMB, NFS when you want to access a file system, and Azure file share service or the resources that you have created use the protocol called SMB. Now it will take some time for the file share resource to be created, but what's more important is, Abhishek, you said this file system can be, or this resource can be connected with multiple virtual machines or Kubernetes pods. But how do I do that? So once this is created, you will see an option here, like there is an option called browse. And here you can upload files. That is, let's say I want to share a particular file amongst multiple VMs. So using this upload, I can upload some files, just like I've uploaded a index.html. And coming to the connection part, if I have a virtual machine, I want to connect to it, then click on this connect button, depending upon the type of your virtual machine. If it is Windows or Linux or macOS. So let's say I'm using macOS, then I can simply click on this button called show script, copy this and execute this on your Mac terminal. And then you will be connected to the file share resource. If you are using Windows, you will get a PowerShell script. Just copy it and paste this entire script. It's very simple. Just copy paste this script and you will be connected to the test file share. Perfect. So this is how you connect to the file share and access any resource. You can upload any number of files here. That's not a restriction. Then we have queues. So let's say if your application wants to use a lot of messaging queues. So just go here, type the name of your application. Let's call it as Puma Sales again, and click on the OK button. Go to the Puma Sales. Then you can add a message manually, or this message can be automatically added. Let's say you are using a serverless architecture where your application is processing the data in queues. Then probably this is updated using some automation where there can be 10 messages in the queue and your application process each queue in the order. Then you have tables, just like I've explained you at the beginning of this video. When you want to create anything similar to a NoSQL database, or you want to store some semi-structured data, just create a table and you can store that. Let's say I want to create something called test 1, 2, 3, 4 table. Now comes one more important use case of this storage account. There is something called as storage browser. And this is a really cool option where you can browse all the resources and all the data that you have created in the storage account. let's say go to the storage browser and click on blob containers. So here, these are the two containers that I have, and click on one of these things. Let's say test blob storage. So here I've created the HTML file. You can view it from the storage browser. Similarly, you don't have to go to each of these things. Just go to the storage browser, go to the tables. I've created a table, right? And within this table, I can add entities from the storage browser itself. Click on add entity. And like I told you, you can enter anything in the key value pair type. Let's say you want to add a string. So let me add something called Abhishek. Add property. Now, similarly, you can add and just click on the insert button. Just delete this one, insert, and Abhishek is added. So storage browser comes very handy when you have lot of resources that are created. Using this storage browser, you can access it. You don't have to go to each and every resource. You can directly access it through the storage browser. And storage account has additional advantages. Just like AWS has an option for static website hosting, we can also do it in Azure. Just scroll down and you have option here, static website hosting. Just click on enabled, provide the HTML file that you want to host. Let me call it as index.html. Save it, and now automatically when you save it, a container gets created for you. Let's open this container, and within this container, just try to upload your HTML file. Whatever the name that you have provided, I provided HTML, so I will upload index.html file. Click on the upload button and your index.html is uploaded. You can access this index.html if you go back to the static hosting. This is the primary endpoint. Select this, go to your browser and search for it. My first heading, my first paragraph, just a simple HTML file. So you can also do static website hosting using the storage account. Just like you do the static website hosting on S3 in AWS, you can also do it from here. So these are the different types of storage services. Everything can be accessed from the storage account. And I've also explained what are the use cases of each storage service. And when should you go for storage service? If you want to go to blob, when you have to go for it. If you want to go to file share, when you have to go for it. And if I go back to the storage account one more time, so I've created a storage account, right? Let me go to foobar sales. And here, there are multiple other options, right? We just explored the data storage. We just explored about the static website hosting. But there are other things like the storage account and the resources can be integrated with Microsoft AD, Active Directory. When we learn the RBAC concept, we have a dedicated class for it. You will understand more about the importance of Microsoft AD. And once we integrate the storage account and the resources with Microsoft AD, that's where the IAM or the access related things comes into picture. We will learn them. You can also perform encryption, because when you store data, sometimes encryption is very important. Probably when you're dealing with unstructured data in the blob storage, you might not want to use encryption. But when you are using the file storage resource and you have some files uploaded to it, and there are multiple virtual machines accessing it, uploading and downloading, then probably the encryption comes more handy. There is data protection. We'll explore these options as we do the projects, because today is the first time where we are exploring the Azure storage account. Let's not go further deep into it, and that's what we have for today's video. You can also go through the notes one more time for a quick revision to understand what are these 4 storage resources and when to use them. Thank you so much for watching today's video. See you all in the next one. Take care.